From Banksy to Extinction Rebellion, artivism, that's activism through art, is the art of our era. But is this fusion of art and activism all that it seems? British art critic and author for Spiked, Alexander Adams, joins me now to discuss his new book, out this week, which is all about this topic. Alexander, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Andrew.
So, this is the book, Artivism, the Battle for Museums in the Era of Postmodernism. We can see it there on the screen. So, talk to me about this. What exactly is artivism?
Well, artivism is either activism through art or it's political art.
OK.
I suppose in the postmodern era, it's now morphed into something weird where you can just nominate something as art. So Duchamp nominated the urinal as art, and that became an art object and was exhibited in a gallery.
Yes.
So now what you've got is people saying, well, OK, we want to be politically active. What we're going to do is we're going to have like a drop-in legal centre and we're going to call it art. Or we're going to do a soup kitchen and we're going to call it art. And so suddenly you've got all sorts of things that have activism which has moved into museums and which is now taking up the venues, the status and, most importantly, the resources of fine art. But it's actually political activism.
So I see this again and again, and it seems like the art establishment is very much on the side of activism. It's become a kind of activist movement. The Turner Prize last year was won by five activist collectives.
Yeah.
And you can be sure that they wouldn't have won had the Turner body not approved of the political message behind their work. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what you find is that the people on the left are always saying that everything is political,
yeah.
But then, weirdly, some politics is more acceptable than other politics. So I've researched this book, and when it came to that, I found lots of organisations, activist organisations, working through art that were pro-migration. I didn't find any that were anti-migration. I find it interesting that there was no money going to that. There was no money going to any activism that was opposed to abortion or that was pro-Christian or that was more traditionalist. All the activism that was being supported through state funding was all left-wing or progressive.
Now, of course, there's always been the potential for art and literature to be political in nature. And you can always have pedagogic work, but often it's boring. I mean, often it's quite banal. I think when I read a book and I'm being preached at, I tend to switch off. So why is this now considered so? Why is it so prevalent? Isn't it just bad art, a lot of it?
It is bad art. It's because it's permitted. What you've got is people moving into art who are not actually artists. They're actually activists, and often they say that they are activists. They're social activists. They want to change the world. So what happens is that they suddenly see this opportunity to do their activism in a very nice environment. They can go into a museum. They can go into these marbled halls and they can get nice meals.
They can be lauded for it, right?
They can be lauded. They get taxis back and forth. They get their expenses paid. And so they're fantastic. They can do their activism, but they can do it in a prestigious venue.
And they can still feel like they're anti-establishment while they're being, wined and dined by millionaires.
Yes.
Very strange. But when do you think this happened, where it became the norm for art to have an activist purpose?
Well, I trace back in the book where you had a group of Chicano artists in the 1970s who were involved with making murals and setting up workshops with the community.
Yeah.
And actually, this is quite laudable, and it was bringing in a lot of people into the art world and getting them involved with projects and educating them and exciting them. But I think that afterwards you came to a situation where you had all sorts of activism which could appropriate the title of art.
Yes.
And suddenly it became a lot more direct, it became a lot more didactic, and you had a lot of people coming in from outside telling communities what they thought that communities should be doing.
Yeah, OK. So then how do we tackle this? How do we reinstate the purpose of art for its own sake,
You abolish the Arts Council, but abolishing the Arts Council is like abolishing the media, abolishing the mafia. Because they're absolutely tied into the Department of Culture, they're tied into the civil service.
Yes.
They have their tentacles in almost every arts organisation in the country.
Yes.
So if you go after them, you'd have like a tsunami of protest coming from not only The Guardian, but every arts organisation in the country.
Yeah.
So you can imagine that if someone were brave or stupid enough to say, abolish the Arts Council, they're in for a torrid time.
But is it just that people are misapprehending the purpose of art? If we go back to Oscar Wilde's preface to The Picture of Dorian Gray, where he talks about good and evil are just raw materials for the artist, and there's no such thing as a moral book or an immoral book. Books are well written or badly written, that is all. Now, that message appears to have been lost, I think. And I think maybe it's time that we come back to the idea that art doesn't have to be moral. It doesn't have to teach us things. You can represent evil phenomenon in a quite beautiful, interesting way, right? Yeah. So this is more interesting to me, I think.
And also it's possible to have great art which is also political. So Guernica, for example, you've got Delacroix, Liberty on the Barricades, you've got Goya's paintings of the massacre in Madrid.
Yes.
So these can be fantastic works of art and can also have a huge political message.
Yes.
So it's possible to do that if you're a really skilled artist, but of course the artists who are working today, the artivists, are not skilled at all.
So that's another important question. I mean, my understanding of the Duchamp urinal was that that was kind of a prank.
Yes.
And yet now that seems to become like normalised, that idea. You know, I could pick up that glass and sign it and say, and declare it to be art. And I can be talentless and still be successful.
Actually, that's what my art professor did. Michael Craig Martin, who was a teacher at Goldsmiths, his most famous sculpture was an oak tree, which was a glass of water on a shelf. And he said, "This is an oak tree." And people said, "What? This is meant to represent an oak tree?" He says, "No, I have transformed it into an oak tree."
Well, because I was just joking. But he actually did that.
Of course, he did that in the 1970s. Come on.
God, I'm so behind. OK. But so is it not possible that the artists who prioritise their activism just aren't very good at art?
Yes, but then, but then you could say that about the majority of artists at any time. But at least in the past, they were skillful. They had certain craft skills. Yeah. They could make a good painting. They could carve well, even though they might not have been of the highest quality.
Yes.
But today they can't even do that. What they do is they outsource it to craftsmen. And they are literally, you know, when you see sort of the fourth plinth in Trafalgar Square, all of those sculptures have been made by craftsmen. They've been made by fabricators, in workshops.
Yes.
And they've simply had the artist come in and tell them, "Oh, I'd like something like this. Here's the maquette." Yes. Make it a sort of 7 foot tall.
Yeah, I mean, so we need to... Maybe it's about the art schools. It's about reinstating the importance of craft, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely. There's that, and then there's also... you might have a look at what's going on in the culture ministry. I mean, I think we've had, you have... The culture minister lasts for an average of about sort of 9 or 11 months before they're moved on, and that's even without change of government. So it's absolutely rudderless at the top.
Right. OK, well, much to think about. This is the book. It's called Artivism, The Battle for Museums in the Era of Postmodernism, so do check that out. Alexander Others, thanks very much for joining me.